look at a bit further on with Act 2 and beginning with this exchange between Algernon and Cecily. I hope, Cecily, I shall not offend you if I state quite frankly and openly that you seem to me to be in every way the visible personification of absolute perfection. I think your frankness does you great credit, Ernest. If you will allow me, I will copy your remarks into my diary. Do you really keep a diary? I'd give anything to look at it, may I? Oh, no. And so we have this interesting similarity here, I think, perhaps with Blanche's letters. Cecily's diary, I think, offers a fairly significant comparison with Blanche's letters. But here, she has actually, power over Algernon to actually see this, which is obviously unlike the way that Stanley Kowalski sort of forces the Blanche's hand and forces her to reveal the contents of these letters to him. Ironically, here, Cecily almost sort of wants the contents of these letters exposed. So there's a sort of a reversal here about the status of fabrication. Her letters are fabrications, but she appears to want them to be given sort of centre stage and for reality again, in that true sense of aestheticism, to mirror what's real. Further down, this idea develops as Algernon speaks very rapidly. Cecily, ever since I first looked upon your wonderful and incomparable beauty, I've dared to love you wildly, passionately, devotedly, hopelessly. I don't think that you should tell me that you love me wildly, passionately, devotedly, hopelessly. Hopelessly doesn't seem to make much sense, does it? And I think here, there's a sense of their deliberate self-consciousness in terms of the aesthetics that they're using to view their relationship. They through this language, which I think again also is so cliche that it reminds us of Goldberg's speech in the birthday party. It shows us that there's two characters that are conscious of their aesthetic manipulation of reality, particularly in terms of a romantic relationship, and that you see this through Cecily's sort of bottom line. It's almost a kind of meta-theatrical moment where she seems to be saying to him, this doesn't make sense, almost from a kind of feedback on his writing. He's writing their relationship and he's using these descriptive words to reveal his love for her, and she seems to be almost giving him feedback on the quality of his aestheticization of their relationship. So again, there's that self-consciousness, so self-conscious aesthetic that's involved in the way that they describe each other, and they are both aesthetes to a certain extent, so that makes perfect sense. Now, how did we become engaged? What we're talking about here is, at this moment in time, she's talking about having fabricated their story. She says further up, she says, "Oh, silly boy, why, we have been engaged for the last 3 months. For the last 3 months, yes, it will be exactly 3 months on Thursday." So again, we have this suggestion that their relationship itself is an aesthetic, or is best viewed through an aesthetic because it's a fictional production. And then at the bottom here, of course, a man who is much talked about is always very attractive. One feels there must be something to him after all. I dare say it was foolish of me, but I fell in love with you, Ernest. And I think this, again, invites a similar sort of a representation or comparison of the similarity of the representation of the relationship here as it does with Lulu and Goldberg. We have that sense of them, almost living out an already kind of performed version of their relationship. It just happens to be here that these two are actually in control of this already mapped out version of their relationship, because they are almost being granted power through their aesthetic control over their relationship, whereas in the birthday party it's that sense of their relationship already having been lived out and therefore becoming cliche is a way of saying the intimacy that we're seeing in relationships is just another form of the inauthenticity of emotional experience and of relationships. At the bottom, on the 14th of February last, worn out by your entire ignorance of my existence, I determined to end the matter one way or another, and after a long struggle with myself, I accepted you under this dear old tree here. The next day I brought this little ring in your name, and this is a little bangle with the true lover's knot I promised you always to wear. So again, at that moment in time, we have this sense of engineered reality. And that here, I think that the very obvious comparison is with Blanche, the way that she seems to be engineering reality itself, but particularly her relationship with Mitch. But actually, here, what ends up occurring is that real life ends up mirroring the aesthetic that they construct between each other. And so there's a much more optimistic sense of aestheticism. At the top, Agnes says, "Yes, you've wonderfully good taste, Ernest. It's the excuse I've always given for your leading such a bad life, and this is the box in which I keep all your dear letters." Kneels at the table, opens the box, and produces letters tied up with blue ribbon. And so again, there's that sense, I think, of Blanche's trunk, which is real. The letters that Blanche's trunk contains, even though much of what's inside it is fabrication. Here, these letters themselves are fabricated entirely, and again, real life ends up mirroring those fabrications. And Algernon says, "My letters, my own sweet Cecily, I've never written you any letters." And we have this point here. "I was forced to write your letters for you." So we've got this, he's not actually able to see his own letters. We've got this almost the entire reversal of the Stanley Kowalski situation in Streetcar, where he actively invades Blanche's trunk and uses the contents of those letters against her. Here, he's supposed to have written them. The writing of them has been taken out of his control, and then he's not even allowed access to them. So that the interesting thing is about the power involved in this aestheticism and the position of female dominance in this moment. And then they talk about the relationship. "Why did you break it off? What had I done? I'd done nothing at all, Cecily. I'm very much hurt indeed to hear you broke it off, particularly when the weather was so charming." So again, the fact that he's hurt at this moment in time shows us that the emotional responses themselves are inauthentic. And I think, again, they invite comparison with some of those moments in the birthday party that deliberately make a sort of a performance of emotion that masks the inauthenticity at its core. And then Cecily says, "It would hardly have been a really serious engagement if it hadn't been broken off at least once, but I forgave you before the week was out." And so this fabrication is much like Goldberg's language, but it's so much like Blanche's deliberate sense of how reality should be. That their romance should, in many ways, mirror the fabrication that she's concocted, and that life itself should mirror the aesthetic that Blanche sees embodied, for example, in the paper lantern. Cecily at the bottom says, "You dear romantic boy." He kisses her, she puts her fingers through his hair. "I hope your hair curls naturally, does it?" And I think there's this, an ironic comment on the inauthenticity of beauty here and the inauthenticity of what they're doing. And then Algernon undermines this by saying, "Yes, darling, with a little help from others, I'm so glad." And actually, this reminds me a great deal of some of those hollow moments of reassurance between Goldberg and McCann. That he actually admits in these lines that it's not natural because other people help him do it, or the implication is that other people have helped him curl his hair. And then she says, "I'm so glad," because actually almost the syntax of the sentence sounds like it's a reassurance when actually it's the sort of opposite meaning. Further down, "I don't think I could break it off now I've actually met you. Besides, of course, there's the question of your name." "Yes, of course, you must not laugh at me, darling, but it always had been a girl's dream of mine to love someone whose name was Ernest." And so we've got this moment here where the irony is completely situational in it, because it's after the fabrication. We've got this sense here of needing to fall in love with someone called Ernest. There's something in that name that seems to inspire absolute confidence. Well, of course, the necessity of falling in love with someone called Ernest in the story is based on a fabrication. So the claims that she makes for the name and its integrity, its authenticity, actively undermine the promises that the name seems to contain. So there's an enormous amount of situational irony within the name itself and her desire for that name. Further down, Merriman comes in and says, "Isn't Mr. Worthing in his library?" Mr. Worthing went over in the direction of the rectory some time ago. Pray ask the lady to come out here. Mr. Worthing is sure to be back soon, and you can bring tea. Miss Fairfax, I suppose one of the many good elderly women who are associated with Uncle Jack in some of his philanthropic work in London. I don't quite like women who are interested in philanthropic work. I think it's so forward of them. So I think there's a huge sense of falsity here. In charity, that it's forward of you. It's almost presumptuous and rude to be interested in philanthropic work, to be doing something for others. And so we have this sort of tragic sense here of people having considerations for others as being almost forward, because it seems to be so at odds with human nature. It seems to be so inauthentic. Now, Gwendolen enters the equation here, and they meet each other. Let me introduce myself. My name is Cecily Cardew. Cecily Cardew, what a very sweet name. Something tells me that we're going to be friends. I like you already more than I can say. My first impressions of people are never wrong. So, here, the dramatic irony involved in this is that she doesn't actually know the real person that she's supposed to be in love with. So her first impression of that person is simply an impression and is based on falsity. And so there's an enormous amount of irony involved in this, and that we see then a perceptual problem that I think most definitely connects to Ephraim in Desire Under the Elms, but also Stanley Weber in The Birthday Party. His perceptual issue, as we would call it, from Goldberg and McCann's perspective, is readjusted by their forceful interrogation. How nice of you to like me so much after we have known each other such a comparatively short time. Something so inauthentic is nice. Pray sit down. I may call you Cecily, may I not? What, with pleasure. And you will always call me Gwendolen, won't you, if you wish? Then that is all quite settled, is it not? I hope so. They pause and sit down together. So there's this huge effort here to fix identity, which I think is in ironic contrast to the fluidity of the male identities that permit these kind of free lifestyles that are underwritten and enabled by those identity fluidities. The important thing here is that the effort to fix identity is entirely in the hands of these women, and we don't see that in Blanche whatsoever, and we don't see that in Stanley Weber. These women have a power to manipulate and to make themselves malleable, and it is a way of conferring power on them in Wilde's aesthetic. Gwendolen says, perhaps this might be a favourable opportunity for my mentioning who I am. My father is Lord Bracknell. And I think there's something extremely ironic about this as well. That the mentioning of who I am is actually, ironically, not a mention of her identity, but of her relations. And that we see this kind of construction of who she is by virtue of her associations in family. Outside the family circle, Papa, I'm glad to say, is entirely unknown. I think it's as quiet as it should be. The home seems to be the proper sphere for the man, and certainly once a man begins to neglect his domestic duties, he becomes painfully effeminate, does he not? Something extremely ironic here, because it's the reverse of females in Streetcar, that it's men neglecting their domestic duties, and because they do that, they become effeminate. So we have a complete inversion of the gender roles in terms of domesticity in this construction by Gwendolen. And I don't like that. It makes men so very attractive. Cecily, Mamma, whose views on education are remarkably strict, has brought me up to be extremely short-sighted. It is part of her system. So do you mind my looking at you through my glasses? So this short-sightedness, like Stanley after he's been converted, is actually about restricted orthodoxies. The perceptual problems and limitations in vision are on the basis of an adherence to a type of orthodoxy that promotes that type of myopic short-sightedness.